Okay, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. My name is Tim Nurse, and I'm the president of Making Sense International. I would like to welcome you to our virtual town meeting today. This event will serve to kick off activities for our Global Youth Economic Opportunity Summit this year and help guide our collective response to a post-COVID-19 world. We have over 300 leaders in our field registered, and I look forward to an informative discussion today. Without further ado, I'm going to kick it off by introducing Sarah Sladen, the director of our Youth Economic Opportunity Network. Sarah is going to lead the conversation of the different speakers today, and also lead a Q&A later on. Sarah, please take it forward.
I hope that wherever you are safe and healthy. I think I was muted just now, so just to say thank you and welcome to everybody for joining us for the virtual town hall. This event has come together very quickly, and so I want to thank our team for their hard work and our speakers and discussants for joining us and for your contributions today. We've all been in rapid response mode. I think we've been focused on taking care of our staff, our local partners, the youth we serve, and ourselves. There has also been an explosion of information about the coronavirus pandemic, its impacts, and there's been a rollout of numerous new efforts to respond to the crisis that are important but also disparate, and it's hard to keep track of everything in our space. So the purpose of today's virtual town hall is for us to take a pause, to connect as a community, and to begin to situate where we are right now. So we'll start by exploring some of the immediate impacts of the crisis on young people, how our respective organizations are responding, and what we're learning as we pivot. We're also going to explore how these lessons can inform rebuilding more resilient and inclusive systems for youth economic opportunities in a post-COVID world. As Tim shared, we have over 300 participants registered in a short amount of time, so there's clearly a lot of demand for conversation like this, and we won't cover everything we need to today. We also won't answer all the questions that need to be answered. But we will use today's discussion as a jumping off point for ongoing virtual engagement, learning, and information sharing between now and our Global Youth Economic Opportunities Summit event this fall. I'm going to share more about our network's plan to pivot the summit in response to the coronavirus at the end of today's event, but I want to get the conversation started. We are joined by a truly great group of speakers and discussants today, each of whom brings different perspectives from across our community as economists and researchers, funders, implementers, private companies, young leaders, and global networks. Each of our opening speakers today will just take a few minutes to help build a picture of where we are now and offer some thoughts on how we move forward. We'll then open up the conversation and invite our community discussants to build on these points and share some more on-the-ground insights from our youth programs and initiatives in different parts of the world. For those listening in, we also invite you to engage by submitting your questions in the chat box. I believe it's on the bottom right of your Zoom screen, and we will do our best to get to these during the discussion as time allows. So to kick things off, I'm going to turn to Dr. Nicole Golden with Energy Advisory. She's also a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. I think most of you know Nicole. She's a longtime thought leader in our space and brings some much needed macroeconomic perspectives of the crisis. So Nicole, thank you for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah and Tim. And it's great to be with all of you wherever you are. Again, hopefully keeping safe and healthy yourself and your families and just everyone around us. So I'm going to start by telling us all what we already know, which is unfortunately we're in a generally negative economic situation. We've gone kind of from a slowdown to a virtual, no pun intended, shutdown. And you might have seen the headlines in the US economy yesterday has contracted just nearly 5% in the first quarter of 2020 alone. The IMF recent updated projections for 2020 estimate a shrinking of the global economy by 3%. And the World Bank has projected that in the countries where most of us focus our work, as many as 60 million, an estimated 50 million more people are at risk of being pushed into extreme poverty. That's an estimated 23 million in sub-Saharan Africa, 60 million in South Asia. So this is a very precarious situation. And unfortunately, for all of us in the work we really do, is the pattern of recent economic history tells us that youth the situation does not bode well for youth, right? We know young workers, youth small business owners are more likely to be disproportionately impacted by this crisis. This is what we saw with the 2008 global financial collapse, which really exposed, I think, what we already knew to be vulnerabilities in the youth labor market, but we really saw that being reinforced. ILO data, just to kind of ground in some numbers, indicates that between 2007 and 2009, youth unemployment increased by 7.8 million, while in the decade before that economic crisis, the number of unemployed youth on average annually increased by only about 191,000 per year. So that's a dramatic and significant difference. Interestingly, an IMF study that was done of the Eurozone and the European economies in 2014 found that at least half of the staggering youth unemployment in the European region at the time, at least half of that could be attributed to this decline in economic output. So we really need to think about what this and know what this really means for young people. And there are a few things that are kind of behind this pattern that are kind of worth just reinforcing and reminding us as we move forward into the conversation about solutions that I'm really excited to hear from everyone about. And the reasons that youth were so hit significantly in 2008 are in many ways at least some of the same reasons that they're likely to be disproportionately affected now. We know that young people tend to work in, at least initially, whether it's the informal economy, in seasonal or temporary work, in contract jobs, and they are more likely and susceptible to be hit, to be laid off, to see their hours cut, or to suffer long-term employment from these kind of susceptible shock events. We also know that many entry-level, lower-skilled jobs that employ youth, retail and services, for example, or hospitality, food and beverage, these are industries that are highly susceptible to a sudden drop in consumer spending. So this is something, again, we all know, but we need to keep in mind. In the case of COVID-19, I mean, there's a couple extra, I think, factors at play here. One is that the schools are closed, right? So we obviously are keeping that in mind, and many of us are working on the supply side, if you will, on the education and training side. And we also know that many youth tend to work without health benefits and without paid leave, and going again back to the kind of the nature of work that youth do. So you have that health risk compounding the economic and the employment risk. So it's a bit of a double whammy. And now that we're seeing this kind of near total shutdown of the economy, of consumer spending with these stay-at-home orders, the restrictions on public places, on activities such as traveling, shopping, dining, all of the things that are particularly problematic for, again, the availability and stability of jobs for youth, as well as for their kind of small business profitability, if we want to think about those young entrepreneurs that we know are so vital to driving economic growth and being part of actually this recovery. So where do we go from here? What do we need to think about as we, again, reimagine the playbook, if you will, going forward? I think a few things I'll throw out, and again, really look forward to hearing from anyone. The most kind of immediate term and the nearer term, we need to really think about making sure we're supporting youth through the near-term shock of the novel coronavirus. We need to think about ensuring how young people are covered by and, very importantly, aware of social protection measures that may be available. We know often they aren't, but where they are, make sure whether that's unemployment insurance or emergency measures like emergency paid leave, some special kind of small business loans, or debt forgiveness. And this is really also important for student debt, where that exists. Because we know many young people that we work with are trying to struggle to stay in school and work at the same time. And so we need to be mindful of all of that. We need to prioritize taking extra efforts to ensure that youth have access to kind of digital tools and remote resources for learning, as well as, in particular, these short-term courses that could enable young people to quickly gain a skill, a new skill that can maybe help them earn a supplemental or a smoothing income from, whether that's from a freelance platform or, kind of in the gig economy as we work through this. We need to prioritize hiring youth alongside other vulnerable, impacted worker cohorts in response-related activities, in response-related surge or public works type of jobs. That might be, you know, contact tracing or delivery types of jobs that are surging. And also, and I'm really glad we have Susan here to, you know, speak about IYF, but also AIYD's perspective, because advocacy is really critical. I mean, again, seemingly youth, despite all of what, you know, I've just said, youth are seemingly left out of the conversation. And this signals that deliberate and targeted inclusion in the response could be inadequate at best, or, you know, kind of altogether lacking, you know, at worst. You know, on that, the recent coronavirus-centered World Economic Outlook by the IMF last week made zero mentions of youth or gender, for that matter. So, you know, quite surprising, giving all that we said. So, in just a couple more points in the medium and longer term, I think, again, this crisis has reinforced the need for social protection for youth as kind of part of the youth employment set of interventions. It's something that's been out there, but maybe hasn't been as robust a piece of the puzzle that we've thought about. And then lastly, maybe on the opportunistic side, I think the virus exposed, you know, what we already know to be the needs of the health system, especially in a lot of the places where we work, and the weaknesses in the health workforce. But this kind of creates a bit of an opportunity and sort of the much broader range of kinds of work in the broader kind of care system, in particular lower and middle skill jobs that are needed alongside those higher skill medical professional jobs. So I think we can, you know, think about that as we kind of reimagine what this looks like and where there might be opportunities for youth. So I've thrown a lot out there. Really looking forward to hearing from everyone else, what they're doing, what their solutions are, how youth are participating. Thanks again.
Thanks so much, Nicole. Really appreciate the perspective you bring. I think as we go forward, you know, there's a lot of ground to cover in this discussion. In talking to our speakers the last few days, there's some themes around both the supply side and the demand side of this conversation in response to both the disruptions right now, but also where we go forward. And we've also heard some recurring themes around the need to bring together social protections with economic opportunity as we rethink where the jobs will be for young people, but also the kinds of support systems they will need to be more resilient against these future kinds of shocks. So like Nicole, many of you know Susan Reichley. She's the president and CEO of IYF. She's also the former co-chair of AIYD, the Alliance for International Youth Development. Susan, you have worn a lot of hats in our space. You've led on policy at USAID, you've supported youth advocacy at AIYD, and you now lead an international youth serving NGO. Tell us a little bit about what you're thinking right now in terms of where we are and where we go next.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks, Sarah and Tim, for organizing this. I think it just shows the pent-up demand, and it's wonderful to be connected with all of you around the globe. I just look forward to so much the discussion and hearing what you're learning and ideas that you have. And first of all, I just hope everyone is healthy and safe and continues to stay that way. I'm going to try and be really brief. As they mentioned, I'm wearing sort of two hats. One is the Alliance for International Youth Development, which is a very important policy and advocacy, and as Nicole said, who is very much part of that, and Sarah and many of you out there, we need to be out there advocating. This is our time to do this, and most importantly for young people to be at the front of that. So a lot of what I can't cover during my initial remarks, you actually can find in an article that was released this morning in the Georgetown Journal of International Affairs that I published. So please take a look there this morning. So just building on Nicole's comments a little bit about the context and the context of actually even before what we were living with right now with COVID, we saw obviously youth engagement and the issue of young people really taking the lead as being pivotal to the future of not only our economy, but obviously as we're seeing here with health and social issues as well. And yet strong distrust. Survey data prior to COVID-19 really showed all of us that there was a lot of distrust that young people had for institutions. Not just government institutions where we saw a breakdown of youth-state relations, but institutions in general, information sources and whatnot. And yet what we've seen is young people are really poised to co-lead. And we've seen that around the globe. I'll talk about that in a minute. And why is that? I mean, a couple things. One, young people are digital natives. I am not, as many of you know who have worked with me before. They have lived in a virtual world for some time, and now all of us are living in a virtual world. So young people have that advantage of just naturally being comfortable and being able to get things done and mobilize and advocate, as we've seen with a lot of the movement building that's happened around the world, whether that's climate change or gun safety. Digital natives can do that in a way that, frankly, other previous generations couldn't. Another, I think, a key factor here is that young people are very committed to inclusion. The survey data that we found at IYF with the Global Youth Wellbeing Index strongly indicated that 95% believed in gender equality. They were committed to the issues of LGBTQ rights. So the issues of inclusion are paramount in the front of how youth respond. And this is important because, as we've seen, COVID-19 it's really ravaging these communities that have been marginalized and are more vulnerable. So what are young people doing? What we've seen, I think all of you have seen it, and you're doing it out there, is they're not waiting. They're not waiting for government institutions to tell them how to engage. They're actually out there doing it. Our Youth Action Network program at IYF and many of your fellow programs, I know across our AIYD partners, we're seeing them respond. I was on the phone just last week with a young woman named Daniela, who was one of our fellows who was running a 3D printing social enterprise, and she pivoted that enterprise now to produce PPD components. One of our fellows, Tal from Canada, reached out immediately after the crisis and said, I'm pivoting my shoe manufacturing social enterprise into now producing masks. How can I get those masks into the hands of people who need it? So we're seeing this across the board, and not just in social entrepreneurs. I received a letter the other day from an opportunity youth in Chicago who was using the life skills programs and thinking about how can I actually manage not only in employment, but also just in life, right? And how do I manage my emotions? How do I communicate better? And this is a young man who has 3 people in his family, one of them in the hospital in very serious conditions. So young people are engaging, they're not waiting. And I think that's one of the key things that we should keep in mind as we move forward. So just 3 things to consider, I think, looking forward for the discussion I just wanted to put out there. The first, as Nicole, my good friend Nicole, really gave us a wonderful overview of where we are economically. So I'm not going to repeat that, but just want to put out there, obviously, the urgent need to invest in digital learning for livelihoods. And what I mean by that is that we have an opportunity right now, all of us, with all of this time we're spending online, and young people in particular, how can we give them the best learning tools digitally so they're prepared for the rebuilding and the recovery of these sectors? Whether it's the hospitality industry that has been decimated right now, food service, the retail industry, many of those workers will not come back. I've spoken to a lot of industry leaders, and they are concerned that those workers were spooked in a sense and will not return to those industries. So young people are poised if we can help them develop those skills. And also those industries will dramatically change now, as we're already seeing, as restaurants are reopening or areas, they're not doing it in the same way. So digitally being able to connect with customers and help those who then start to re-engage in society in a way that's safe and healthy for the customer, but obviously also for the employee. The second thing is, I talked about learning for livelihoods, but we also have to make learning virus proof. And this is something I talk about in the article you'll see. And what this means is, as Nicole said, we have so many young people, 90% of young people and children are out of formal education. That is just astounding. It has never happened before. So while we're hearing that statistic a lot, we really need to keep it at the forefront. So how do we make learning really virus proof, that young people can learn and engage and build skills. You know, at IYF, we were fortunate with the support of PepsiCo to launch a Passport to Success Traveler program. It's our digital life skills program, which was designed to reach 1 million young women. Well, we all need to go far beyond that. And so I think just challenging ourselves to develop mobile technologies as well as access. As we know, access is a huge issue. And so all of you out there who can work on those last mile initiatives, those are the big banks, the policy community, please invest there. And then finally, thirdly, obviously engaging youth. As I mentioned at the start, we have to reframe this relationship of youth-state relations. And we have an opportunity right now because frankly, as we're seeing, local communities are and should be taking the lead in the recovery, in the crisis response and the recovery. Well, young people as partners who actually know their communities incredibly well, are digital natives, are innovative. Nicole mentioned as well the importance of thinking of them as national responders. We've seen that with tracing and testing. We need the investment to do that. And they're going to approach it in a much more inclusive way because they're looking at society in a different way than frankly the traditional approaches. I was recently talking to a colleague at Brookings who engaged the city leaders of Los Angeles and Milan in their crisis response. And they have traditionally engaged youth in their general activities. Right now they're in crisis mode, but I really challenge all community leaders to engage young people in the response and in the recovery moving forward. So I will stop there and just pass it back to Sarah and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Susan. It's great to have your perspectives. A couple of more really key themes. I mean, youth engagement, youth partnerships in a real way is obviously key. I mean, Nicole, you referenced the fact that we still can't seem to get youth on global agendas in a real way, and it's sort of astonishing. But as we look forward, I think we're going to hear more comments about rethinking not just youth as partners in response to the crisis, but in the long-term recovery. That's going to take, you know, recognizing what youth are capable of and doing right now. You referenced some of the assets young people bring to the table, Susan, but also the issue of distrust of institutions. And I think there's going to be a lot of work to be done to advocate to leaders to rethink how they view young people as critical partners in this. We have a couple of global networks that engage young people on this discussion today. And I want to come to Jamie McAuliffe in our discussion. Jamie's leading up the Global Opportunity Youth Initiative from the Aspen Institute. To hear a little bit more about what young people are doing on the ground. I know for our platform at Making Sense, the Youth Lead platform, we have a global network of young people who have been incredibly active in response to the coronavirus pandemic and are mobilizing themselves and taking action. It's really inspiring. It's also a really important reminder that youth are working on this right now and we need to partner with them. This piece on digital learning and livelihoods, I've heard this a few times. And so I want to turn to our next speaker. Marisa Vela is a private finance operations specialist with the IDB Lab at the Inter-American Development Bank. She's also a member of the Youth Employment Funders Group, so she brings some of that perspective. And Marisa, you've mentioned that the IDB is leading a number of initiatives right now. Help us understand why these investments are important in response to the impact of the coronavirus for youth in the LAC region. And when we spoke yesterday, you also talked a little bit about women and girls and this issue of digital skilling. So welcome to the conversation and go ahead.
Yes, hi, I work at the Innovation Lab of the IDB, which is the private sector branch. And we focus on technology to test new models with high impact potential for disadvantaged populations. And what we decided to do with this situation is considering the weak health public system in Latin America, we decided to mobilize our strong network, which is the 26 country offices that we have in the region and the network that our specialists have there. And we launched a proposal, a call for proposals related to COVID in the areas of prevention, detection, and treatment. And we were pleasantly surprised, touching what Nicole was saying before about how youth react. It was amazing to see the amount of proposals. We were able to get about 500 within a week. And just to give you an example of one of them is one to create respirators in Medellin, Colombia, that is now being financed. So this just shows you that when there's a crisis, creativity is unleashed and you can attain results, really positive results within, the sadness of this whole crisis. And also touching on what both Nicole and Susan were saying about skills, what is going to happen in Latin America now is an acceleration of the digitalization, because we were slowly digitalizing, but now it's evident, and I've been attending different seminars and talking to different corporations, and it's evident that we need it for telework, obviously, so platforms need to be, provided. We need it for children to go back to school, and also micro, small, and medium enterprises are faced with this situation now that they need platforms because they need to continue with e-commerce and with payments. So fintechs are really crucial in this situation. And it's not only that micro enterprises lack this, but they lack the skills. So the digital skills. So they need the personnel to be able to provide all the support so that they can continue going. And I'm happy to look back, because we started focusing on technology to provide digital skills to youth about 3 or 4 years ago. And we detached from the work that we did before. So we just focused on that, but thinking that this would allow youth to obtain quality employment, salaries that could take them out of poverty and help them help their families and their communities, not just for the sake of having digital skills. And what this brings now is that it provides them with not only the skills for the market demand, the existing market demand that has been ongoing in Latin America, but also now with the instruments to survive in this crisis. Because I think youth are going to be positioned to either find employment with the digital skills, let's say those that have gone through boot camps, or entry-level position in small tech companies that are going to, mushroom nowadays. But also, the instruments to be able to work by themselves in the gig economy, like Nicole was saying. So it's a positive outcome of this pandemic, the digitalization in Latin America. But I also want to share the gender concern, because the ILO stated that women are going to be hit worst financially with this crisis. And there's also something that I was told in a meeting this week, which is kind of sad, and it's that domestic violence increased all over the world, but especially in Latin America. And to give you some statistics, the calls for domestic abuse increased 90% in Colombia, 60% in Mexico, and 40% in Argentina. So why am I sharing this statistics? Because I think all organizations have to generate awareness of this and take action. Because I think girls not only need skills, but they also need the support to be able to be empowered. And with this, I think I finished my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marisa. So I think you've raised some really important issues that kind of broadly speak to the issue of inclusion. One of the issues I think Nicole highlighted is that the majority of youth populate parts of the economy that are particularly vulnerable to economic shock. And in some ways, I feel like we have the potential to continue that trend by pushing youth into kind of near-term solutions and gig work. On the other hand, that's what we have to do. That's where the opportunity is. And I think there's a lot of opportunity from the crisis to expand digital skilling across the world in places. I want to come back to the question later in the conversation around the issue of the digital skills gap, recognizing that, youth may be digital natives, I think, as Susan pointed out, and may be better suited to this moment than many of us. But there's also the issue of access and who has access to digital skill building and generally, technology and resources, and who does not. And so during the discussion, it would be great to hear from some folks about, as we think about scaling up skilling in digital skills and what investments in the space look like, how do we, in the back of our minds, ensure inclusion? And I think that's the same is true for young women and girls who have been disproportionately impacted. I think we really need to incorporate in our responses a consideration of inclusion and exclusion. You've all raised a number of really important points. I think also helped us to think about the big picture of this crisis. I want to turn to our next two speakers and get a little bit closer to the ground, so to speak. And our next two speakers are from South Africa and Haiti. Rob, I'm going to come to you next, and then Jupil, I'll turn to you to close us out. Rob is the lead for knowledge and research at Haramba Youth Employment Accelerator in South Africa. They're doing some amazing work right now to respond to the crisis. Rob, tell us a little bit about what Haramba is doing and what you're learning from the crisis through this process.
Great, thanks, and hi, everyone. In South Africa over the last 8 months, really effectively back-ending the presidential youth employment intervention that's been on the go. And I think what the opportunity presented with the onset of the pandemic in South Africa and a subsequent lockdown was an opportunity to pivot in two ways and pivot very, very quickly. So on the one, our first move was to pivot on the demand side and occupy an interstitial space between employers and government with our platform work, and to work very quickly with our employers to very quickly collect information around how employers were being affected on the ground, all the way from small and medium enterprises up to the large corporates, consolidate and aggregate that information, feed it up into the presidency's response units, but also use that as an opportunity to start thinking about what life will look like coming out of a lockdown and how we need to respond. And so we've then been able to feed that into sector response plans and are continuing to do that in a very sort of just-in-time way. Secondly, we've been able to occupy that space as well in working with government to say that we recognize that there are essential services that you need to provide at this point in time, and that you may not have the resources to do so. But a lot of those jobs that you need to be filled, we know that young people can fill those. And so, for example, we have supported the provincial government's food security hotline with young people to provide support to their communities about how they can access food parcels and food packages on the one hand. And then we've deployed over 2 weeks, 300 young people in the last 2 weeks to support the Unemployment Insurance Fund, who have launched a special benefit to support employers and employees who have not been able to draw an income at this point in time. And that hotline is getting 74,000 call attempts a day. So that's on the demand side, is how we've been occupying that sort of space in between government and business, as it were. On the supply side, we've leveraged our platform very, very quickly to say, well, there are very few opportunities, if any, at this point in time for youth in a lockdown. So what we really need to do is to understand and elevate the voice of youth at this point in time up, understand what their concerns are, be able to address that in a very, very real time, because we really, really understand that their resilience is important, not just through getting through this particular crisis, but actually what it looks like coming out of the other side. On the one hand, and then on the other to say that, I think to Susan's point, is that we recognize that youth can play a really, really valuable role as agents of change in their own community. And if we want to get out of lockdown quickly, then if we can capacitate young people to be agents of behavior change in their own communities, we can do that, contain, move into lower stages of lockdown and get people back to working very quickly. So what we did was launch a very ambitious campaign called 3 Million in 3 Weeks, where we took our platform, which was really ostensibly had started off to be about linking young people to opportunities, and pivoted it to reach out to 3 million youth in 3 weeks and provide them with a credible source of information, address their fears and concerns, get them to start changing their behaviors, and then get them to start acting as agents for behavior change in their families and in their communities. we deployed a whole range of different mechanisms to do this. Interestingly enough, just on the digital point, was we worked with Funzi, which is an NGO that has done a lot of work in Syria, deployed a very low cost 8 megabytes for a program of digital skilling office that could run off a feature phone around the coronavirus, have deployed that. It's been endorsed by the UN and is going to be deployed into Africa far more broadly as a standard. Through our 3 million 3 weeks campaign, we actually managed to reach 3 million youth in just over 2 weeks, have now extended that program to the end of June to try and reach 6 million youth in that particular space. And so my very sort of pithy and non-technical kind of takeaway around this is an expression that we have in Harambee, which drives our sort of thinking, which is to fall in love with the problem and not the solution. And in fact, over the last couple of weeks, we've changed that to say, fall in love with the young person holistically, and not a solution that you have a predetermined set of ideas or expectations around. And that's the kind of thinking that we're adopting as we go forward.
Thank you so much, Rob. Yeah, it's been really incredible to hear from you how Harambee is mobilizing. I think it's a great example of you using your network to get rapid help to government initiatives, serving as an intermediary between the private sector and government. And I think in particular, tapping the power and energy of your youth networks to be agents of positive impact and behavior change in your community. A few of our speakers have talked about the need to engage youth in the solution, and I think this is a really concrete example of how you've been able to do that. The other thing I think I really appreciate is that you've brought together the economic response with a social response. And you talked a little bit when we spoke about the need for kind of alongside economic stimulus, the kind of social stimulus package where we think about investments in health and a healthy economy, meaning not just workers who aren't sick, but young people who are entering the economy really supported. I think all of us will be dealing with a certain degree of trauma coming out of this crisis, but it is something we really want to bring together, social support for youth, wraparound services as part of the economic response. And as we move into the discussion, I also want to invite, we have Michael Bizdak from Johnson & Johnson here to help bring some of that other private sector perspective. I know you referenced working in partnership, but I think, Michael, it'd be great to hear from you when we come to you about how you're thinking about this as a global health company, and because of, you've made some significant investments in young people. A big theme, as we shared, is that there's a real role here for young people to lead and engage, and in many cases, young people are already doing that. So I'm really pleased to welcome our last speaker this morning, GYEOS Virtual. GYEOS is a young social impact entrepreneur, a YLI fellow, and a 2018 Youth Lead Ambassador. He is also the founder and CEO of Bamboo Facile in Haiti. GYEOS, it's great to have you with us. Tell us how you're doing and how your team is responding to the crisis. There you are.
Good morning. Yeah, all right. Good morning, everyone. As you already said, my name is Facile VP. I'm founder of Bamboo Facile, an organization that promotes bamboo as a natural, versatile, and sustainable material for construction, manufacturing, and environmental protection. So in last 3 years, we've been focusing on the manufacturing parts, where we found necessary to go to countryside of the country and learn community, train people, and then create bamboo center production where they work for us, and also allow these people to manipulate the bamboo to as an environmental asset. So during that crisis, as everyone, we were very focused on how we can use our moment to transform it into an opportunity to grow, because we are all facing problem during that moment. It's the first time, and then me and my team were thinking about how we can make that crisis an opportunity for us. As we were launched last year a program of bamboo reforestation, and then we imagined that we have more than 5 million of people in Haiti now staying home, and unfortunately they don't really have access to electricity, and they are depressed. I receive call of friends, many people, they spend that on social media, or they feel very depressed, desperate because they don't have trust to the government. So we are thinking about how we can transform that into an opportunity, not only helping those person, but an opportunity to grow, to grow like our business in the country. So we were launching a challenge. It was like eco-citizen challenge, where everyone have to plant any plant, not only bamboo. So it can be mango, it can be banana, any plant. And then you say that this plant that you plant, you're gonna water that plant every morning. So by watering this plant, so you water your hope and your faith, and there is this special moment. So these are the spiritual parts. So when you water every day, you water your hope. And so this is a part of your commitment, because I'm sitting in the shade today because a long time ago there was someone that planted a tree. So when we launched this challenge, we see some friends join us, and then that many other people join us and asking us for bamboo seedling. I didn't think that, me personally, that will transform into a business opportunity. So we have in a lot of like business, like a lot of demands of bamboo seedling, and then that make me very proud. And now we are looking of like creating new strategy to have more bamboo seedling, to like so that 5 million people can plant the bamboo and can benefit the asset of bamboo. Don't forget that in Haiti we have about 80% of slope. Haiti is a mountainous country, and we have only 2% of cover forestry. So this is a really good asset for now, but with that challenge, and many people are joining us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jupilo. That is great. You know, I think your comments really reflect both an incredible creativity we're seeing among young entrepreneurs around the world to respond locally to the crisis and do what they can from home right now to support young people. But I also really appreciate how your response is connecting to the longer term future of Haiti and environmental issues, and thinking about where the opportunities are for livelihoods in a green economy, potentially a way for people to give back right now to their communities. Again, I think that, you know, when we talk about youth as assets and partners in the solution, there are so many examples like you around the world of young people leading and creating and doing what you can with what you have right now. And I think it's a great reminder to all of us who I think tend to sort of think about scale and how many can we reach and how fast, but that these interventions around the world are really important as a kind of collective effort to respond to young people and to rebuild. So thank you so much again for joining us from Haiti, and I hope that you're safe and well. We are going to turn to the second half of our event this morning. And again, I really appreciate all of our speakers for kind of helping ground us, offer some initial thinking and framing. I heard a number of topics over the course of this discussion. The critical role of young people to respond to the immediate crisis and rebuild a post-COVID economy, but also some questions about what that looks like and how we rethink youth engagement. A lot about how most industries where youth economic activity is concentrated are also those most impacted by the pandemic, and really are industries that are most susceptible to shock. So I think there's some questions here about, you know, given that we have pushed young people into these industries for many years, because that's where the opportunity is, will we continue to do that? And if so, what is our responsibility to young people in preparation for how these industries have evolved? And what is the role of industry to help better protect their workforce and young people coming in? We heard a lot about the supply side, so education and digital skills will be in even greater demand going forward. And that is both an opportunity and I think a challenge to us in terms of the digital skills gap and skills development, and thinking about issues of inclusion and access. And there's some intersections there with gender and disability and marginalized youth. I also wonder if there are some lessons we can learn from some of the digital education interventions that have come from working with refugee youth and youth impacted by conflict. We talked about the social impact of COVID-19 on young people and how significant that is. You know, Rob talked about the issues of stress, trauma, depression, and isolation that young people are feeling in South Africa and no doubt around the world. We've heard that domestic violence and gender-based violence is on the rise. There's a real need to go hand in hand with economic responses, wraparound services for young people to ensure their safety and health. So really interested to hear more of what this looks like in practice and maybe some examples from our discussants about what they're doing. And lastly, there is a greater need, I think, very evidently from this for more coordination and collaboration across our sector to respond effectively to this pandemic, but also to rebuild across donors and implementers and youth networks and young leaders. And this is why we're here today. So I'm going to turn to our discussants now and just invite your comments. We might bounce around. I might take some questions back to our speakers from where we started. But speaking of kind of coordination and sharing, I wanted to take this opportunity to invite one of our discussants, Nancy Taggart, Senior Youth and Workforce Development Advisor at USAID, to share some insights from what is going on with USAID and what you all are thinking about and doing right now in response to the crisis. So Nancy?
Thanks, Sarah, and hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, where everyone is. There's a lot to react to, so I'm trying to take notes, and I had some notes already prepared, but forgive me if it's not super linear. I mean, first of all, I wanted to just clarify, I'm not working directly on USAID's task team for the pandemic response, so I can't really officially give you very detailed talking points about everything the agency is doing. I'm going to put in the chat function after this a link to our public fact sheet that does talk about our supplemental funding and details at the country and the regional level about what we're doing. So that can hopefully help. What I did want to touch on, I guess that might be an addition to a lot of the insights that have been shared already, is just some of the priorities that we are working on or looking at or focusing on related to youth employment and livelihoods in different operating units with whom I liaise. We've been having conversations, so I've tried to capture some of those that might be useful, and certainly reiterates many of the themes that have come up already. And then I'm hoping Mike McCabe, my dear colleague, will chime in with his own updates, because he's been, of course, very active. So I will try not to say everything. I'm sure I will not. But just to start us off, within the education office where I sit, much of our work is focused on school, primary school and access in all sorts of contexts. But with that, we are also looking at vocational education and higher education access for youth and older learners. So many of the comments that have come up today looking at the priority of distance education is right aligned with what we're looking at. That is a big priority area. So we've been conducting literature reviews, talking with partners, collecting resources to make those available to our missions, who are really at the core of reprogramming or adjusting priorities with some supplemental funding. So that is a big thrust of what we're doing. And some of our programs have already kind of pivoted or already well prepared to pivot to do that. So we've heard from folks, my colleague Olga Merchant is actually the point of contact in our office for youth, and she's been telling me some of the updates have been coming from Guatemala and Sri Lanka that already have platforms in place to offer soft skills and other skills training online and content online. So that's been really helpful. And we've also been building on a lot of the work that's been done using cell phones and radio. So I think all of these types of strategies can be useful. So that's probably the big push from our office. The other is looking at other strategies to address some of the psychosocial needs and some of the very quicker, immediate needs, like potentially cash transfers. Outside of the education office, my colleagues, some of whom are on the phone, have been sharing that they are really looking at the financing constraint for youth livelihoods and self-employment. So looking at liquidity in the banking system, because obviously that trickles down to access to finance for young people, looking at how to support digitizing services and processes, and then looking, again, again, things that we've touched on today, looking at some of the longer term concerns about related to recovery and how do we adapt to these new markets. So that comes back to some of the issues related to education and the supply side. How do we ensure that what we're offering is relevant as these markets are either being eliminated or changing dramatically? So that's really a question for discussion. How do we, it's always been a challenge, but how do we do that even more as some of the things that we've been investing in, the sectors are now falling away. So that's been a big issue. And then in terms of livelihoods, again, looking at youth in agri-food systems and how that's been changing in terms of obviously supply chains and youth's role in those, being more vulnerable, more exposure as they're working, if they can work, and lack of mobility, how that's constraining their access to markets, and so forth. So I think those are priorities, particularly of our Bureau for Food Security team. And then we have priorities that we've had in place but are just becoming much more front and center. So our DRG labor team has been developing a paper and talking to the Hill on looking at concerns around labor and management, unequal impact of COVID on special populations in the workplace, elder workers, women, migrants, health and safety concerns. So people have touched on that today too. So we're seeing a reflection of a lot of the themes that you guys have already touched on among the priorities of our offices. The other thing I wanted to just reiterate that came up here, but is again, getting a lot of attention in the agency is gender-based violence. And just kind of anecdotally, we've been reviewing many of the task orders under Youth Power, which is our main mechanism, as you know, that's ending this year, and looking at results across that body of work. That report will be coming out in the next month or two. But one of the interesting findings, or at least interesting for me, I wouldn't say it was a surprise, but it was a little bit something I wasn't expecting. There are 11 task orders through that portfolio. In 10 of those, gender-based violence came up as a major issue. And I think that's really worth attention in workforce development program. That isn't an issue that we always think about in our designs and at the outset. So I think that just reiterates now even more that that is an issue that I think we need to give attention to. Yeah, so I think I'll leave it there, but I guess I will end with one point. In terms of some of the opportunities, I know many of you are aware that we have been releasing some new funding opportunities, Youth Power 2's annual program statement, and with that, the first addendum, Youth Excel, I think are opportunities to give funding to some of these issues that we're going to be identifying. So they are available, and Youth Power 2 Learning and Evaluation, which is that follow-on to Youth Power Learning, is a research and evaluation mechanism. I think all of those can really serve a purpose here to support some of the priorities that we're identifying. So I look forward to being involved in that.
Thanks so much, Nancy. It's very helpful. I think part of the goal of this event was to bring together different actors to get aligned on what all of you are doing, and there's so much happening. There's a lot of opportunities. I think this has been helpful, again, in just starting to surface some of the key questions and themes. This gender-based violence pieces keep coming up, but also where the opportunities are and what different donors are doing in this space. We've heard from Rachel at the IDB. It's really helpful to hear from USAID. I want to turn to Mike McCabe, Agency Youth Coordinator at USAID, your colleague as well, and invite Mike. Do you want to share a couple of comments as well and just help us kind of round out some insights from USAID?
Sure, thanks so much. And I'll be really brief because I think Nancy really hit on the key points well. And thanks to Rob and to the others who have spoken. I came on a little bit late because we were doing our Tanzania CDCS. And what we're seeing with all of our missions around the world is, as we're going through, about half our missions are doing their CDCSs right now. And they're really pivoting, looking at what are the secondary impacts that we're going to be dealing with and how the context has changed. And so it is really important, and many of them that I've been on recently are talking about how they're pivoting around the secondary impacts that most affect young people and the human capital development there in a post-COVID or kind of the secondary shocks around education and what's changing there when we have, you know, such a vast percentage of young people out of school, many of which may not return to school in certain environments as they have income insecurity. Looking at the, you know, the scaling levels of unemployment and then how that results in terms of their satisfaction with how governments are responding to these situations, and that could lead to increased levels of instability in a number of these countries. And so I think Nancy and others have touched on a lot of these issues of how do we look at new models of where we create bridges during this economic challenging period of the next year or 2 years for young people to insert into the income security pipeline or into other opportunities, whether that is in public works programs or digital public works programs, or looking at things like even national service programs or cash transfer programs. At the same time, I think we're also looking at the issue of, you know, what is the role that governments can play, and how can we, quite frankly, get the support out to governments to understand what are effective models of cash transfer, what are effective models of public works programs that really can help stabilize during this upcoming year or two period. One of the other things that's been really interesting is the timing of our digital policy and strategy that have come out, and the whole operationalization of that digital policy, because it's really opportune with some of the things that have come out from, for example, Solutions for Youth Employment and others who've been talking about the role of digital jobs over the past few years, and now how that pivots in this period. It's been really interesting to see how our team across the agency is looking at that, from everything from global financial inclusion to other aspects of the digital realm that we can bring into the question of youth economic opportunity. For the upcoming G20, I know this will be an issue both focused on youth and more broadly with the governments about what do we look to in terms of best practices in global financial inclusion for young people. And so I think that's an interesting area for us to all be looking at. And then lastly, I would just say, you know, some of the innovations that have been going on, the African Development Bank, you know, recently last month held its kind of giant hackathon of Africans versus the virus, and had 24,000 submissions, brought that down to 100 ideas that they're moving forward with. There's a number of really innovative ways that people are responding, either with new ideas or, more importantly, taking existing ideas and saying, how do we go to scale with that? So in Sri Lanka, as I think Nancy mentioned, our YouLead initiative in Sri Lanka has now reached about 100,000 young people with how they're advancing better online learning around life skills, soft skills, and other areas, and looking at some of those platforms to build off of. And then obviously through Making Sense and the YouthLead platform, what we're trying to do in terms of a broad network of partners who are putting up where are your simple actions that young people could take in their home, in their community safely, or online to respond to some of these secondary impacts. And they're not just you know, COVID health education. There's some really interesting things that are being done by young change makers that that I think people can find they're similar to GYEOS. So thanks, I'll just stop there.
Thanks so much, Mike. So we've covered a lot of different topics, but I think that they're falling into kind of three broad thematic buckets. And I'd like to use the rest of our time in the discussion to kind of respond to issues within each. The first is, we've heard about this need to adapt to new markets, education, and the supply side, and within that, digital skills and, you know, the evolving nature of industries. The second theme I'm hearing is this issue of vulnerability and inclusion, particularly around gender-based violence, you know, attention to how our responses to the crisis and rebuilding, there's a lot of opportunity, potentially also deepening inequalities among and between youth. And of course, the last theme is the role of youth leadership in all of this. And we've heard some great examples from our discussion so far about what's happening. And I'd like to ask some of our youth networks on the call to speak to that. But starting with adapting to new markets, education, and the supply side, I wanted to turn to Michael Bizdak at Johnson & Johnson. Michael is the Global Director for Employee Engagement and the Global Community Impact. He's been working in workforce preparedness and work-based learning for a long time with Johnson & Johnson. Michael, thanks for being with us today. I wanted just to invite your perspective as someone on the other side of this issue in the private sector, and as part of a global health company. What are some of the things you're thinking about when we're talking about this issue of adapting industries, opportunity, and supply?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, and thank you all. I'm learning a lot on this call. It's great to have such a diverse group of voices. Yeah, I think, I'm hearing a lot of very positive things, but I'm going to throw a couple cautions out there also. Obviously, I think we all recognize this is an opportunity to rethink everything, down to how we are educating. What is learning, what is preparation for this new world. And I heard a phrase that I'm going to be repeating for a long time, is that breakdowns can lead to breakthroughs. So I think if we frame it together, and I heard some wonderful words around coordination and collaboration and building bridges, I think the time is right. I mean, we've been talking about collaboration for a long time. Some people are good at it. Some are not, but I think we need it on a colossal scale, governments, NGOs, and companies. So from J&J's perspective, it's a new world, and my focus has been on employees. And I think I see a huge solution in the future around, we've been using our employees in the best possible way as mentors to young people for 25 years. And I think there's going to be a growing interest in how we do this better and at scale. Our employees are looking for opportunities. We're creating a lot of virtual opportunities for employees to interact with youth. And I think, we alone have 130,000 employees. Lots of wisdom there and lots of opportunities to help guide youth in this new world. And so I'll just leave you, there's a lot going on in our STEM work, as well as our workforce readiness program called Bridge to Employment, which I've had the honor of speaking at your conference. And one of the things that I learned at your conference around digital badging is something that we embraced, and we continue to expand that with the young people we're working with. And I think that's another huge opportunity. My only caution going forward is, let's not try to solve the problems with the tools that caused the problems. And I'm not going to lie. I've been inspired by Winners Take All I read it at the end of last year, used it in my graduate course that I teach at Rutgers, and it has continued to inspire me, well before COVID. And now COVID has just, really revealed a lot of disparities that we're all living with, and we need to acknowledge. So that's all from me.
Great, thank you so much, Michael. It's been really great to have Johnson & Johnson at the table with us over the years, and I appreciate your comments and sharing some insights on what you're thinking about. On this theme of adapting to new markets and evolving industry on the supply side, I wanted to invite some thoughts from Greg Niblett, Vice President at MTC. I think you're on the line. You all have, a lot of experience working in Egypt on your workforce programs. I think the nature of industry is changing. There's been immediate disruption, but there's also going to be some real significant changes to how industry runs. And I just wanted to invite you to speak to some of that and what you're seeing, building on some of what Michael has shared.
Let me test to make sure you can hear me. Yes?
We can hear you. Yeah.
Good morning to everyone, and thank you for convening this. This is a great idea. I think I'll be brief. I think the one big macro point that I would like to make is the difference that this epidemic in the COVID phase and the post-COVID phase is going to have on the informal and the informal sectors. I was listening to Harold Schwartz at Starbucks talk about how in the United States, big companies are going to be able to survive this. They have capital, they have liquidity, they have access to money. And in the US, as you know, it's the small businesses and the gig economy that are really going to get pummeled by this. I want to put out there as a theory that this could be the opposite in developing countries, and this is going to have an impact on young people. I was talking to the head of the Federation of Egyptian Industries just a couple of days ago, who was sharing his concerns about what large and medium companies and large companies established are going to go through. They don't have the liquidity that a lot of countries in the United States or the developed world have. They don't even have the access to capital, and they're kind of scrambling with, and nor do they have governments like ours that can do trillion-dollar bailout packages. So I think the formal sector in developing countries could very well get hit very hard by this. The flip side of that is that the informal sector, which we've all been wanting to transition more into a formal sector with different procedures and processes, you know, that transition may be delayed, and young people who are in the informal sector, and you know there are a lot of them in the developing countries, that's where they're going to continue to be. Now, this could be two sides of a coin. On the one side, it could be that it's, you know, you'd rather be in the informal economy than the formal economy if the formal economy is really going to get hit hard. And at the same time, it's going to delay people transitioning into more stability that seems to come with formal economies. So I just want to put that out there as a theory that it's not something we should overlook in terms of monitoring what's going to be happening to young people in the informal economy. The last point I will make will be about distance learning, because we do a lot of work preparing young people for the workforce, particularly in vocational education and technical education. In Egypt, we're seeing that there's a lot of emphasis from the Ministry of Education working with us that, you know, let's move as quickly as we can to put together distance learning packages for the curricula that exist in these schools in Egypt. And some of them are saying, look, we don't ever want to go through this again. Whether we need distance learning when we reconvene or not, we want to have distance learning ready. But there are challenges with this. The schools themselves already don't have the technological infrastructure in terms of computers and other equipment inside the schools. And a lot of the young people don't have those access to those tools at home. So while we are moving toward distance learning and digitization of curricula, we are going to run into some challenges about how to make sure that schools have the technological infrastructure and how young people at home have that. So those are just the 2 points that I would want to make as we move forward talking about how this is going to affect young people.
Great. Thank you so much, Greg. I really appreciate that. You know, I think building on this theme of, you know, evolving markets, but also intelligence gathering and understanding in real time what's going on with these industries and with young people, there's a real importance for global youth networks, and including those that are engaging with young entrepreneurs. And so that's why I want to turn to one of our discussants here, Urmila Sarkar. She's a senior advisor for planning and programs at Generation Unlimited's global team. Uma, thank you so much for joining us. I know you have to jump off soon, but I wanted to invite you to kind of build on some of what we're hearing about some of the changes you're seeing on the ground. It would also just be helpful to think about, you know, how you are looking at your youth networks and engaging them to gather kind of learning and information about what's happening and how your team is responding. Thanks so much for joining us.
Sure, thanks a lot, Sarah. And I see a lot of, you know, a few familiar faces, and some of you, I think that linked on to our recent board meeting that we had 2 weeks ago, which was on the topic. And I thought, I mean, just to start off a little bit with context, and just I was able to connect about 15 minutes ago, so to hear how all your organizations are adapting to COVID. And I just got off a regional call with East Asia, South Asia, because the Generation Unlimited partnership, I don't know if all of you are familiar, it's a multi-stakeholder partnership hosted by UNICEF, but with a wide variety of UN agencies, private sector, youth networks on the board. Some of your organizations are on the board. And since middle of last year, has opened up into about 31 countries around the world using the public-private partnership platform, with young people being really leading on co-creating those kinds of solutions that can work for them across the education, skills, and employability space. So we were just having this call with all of the kind of leads in those countries in East Asia, South Asia, and it was interesting because while the focus has been on this immediate health crisis, which is totally understandable, and I'm sure you discussed that earlier on the call, it's really important to look at what is the impact the recession is going to have, not only on the immediate school closure, but in terms of their jobs, in terms of their readiness for entrepreneurship. And that's kind of where GYEO is trying to come in to say, yes, we can actually use innovations to advance, even in public health communication, positive behavior change, enabling young people to express their ideas. But we can also use those innovations and vehicle to advance skilling, remote skilling, platforms accessing, so they have platforms for jobs and entrepreneurship. So that's kind of the shift that we've been having to make as a partnership. And what was really interesting to hear, especially in Bangladesh and India, where we have very pretty wide YEO networks coming together, Indonesia, Thailand, that they're already adapting in light of COVID to see to the extent that they can use digital connectivity and platforms to promote online learning, skilling, and youth employment. So that was great to hear that they're already kind of reconfiguring for that. And even in India, where there's a mass entrepreneurship program that starts in schools and moves outward, they've managed to raise $100 million in blended loan facility to support SMEs in India, which is fantastic. And that's all we've been trying to promote within the GYEO platform. So that was great to hear. And just to then go back, and then we're happy to share, because after this, I jump onto a call with Rwanda to look at, how they're trying to innovate and also work with young people in their networks to make a difference. And just to give a little bit of an update from the recent board meeting that we had 2 weeks ago, and GYEO has a board membership about over 50 organizations in the space of UN and civil society and youth leaders themselves. And it was decided at the board meeting that in light of COVID and aligned with the priorities of the Generation Unlimited, that there will be a specific focus around 4 areas: connecting all schools and learners to the internet, scaling up online remote learning, work, and livelihood platforms, boosting entrepreneurial skills and opportunities, and supporting youth as change makers during the crisis and beyond. And I know that Sarah was keen that I bring that up, and we're also looking in terms of young people is how can we use YEO Report is an innovation which allows young people to use digital platforms to spread messages to fight the virus and promote positive behavior change. But those platforms can also be used to express their ideas, and also be used to express how they're feeling about the crisis, the same way that they can be used as resources to promote skilling, entrepreneurship, and employment. And so that's kind of the focus that the refocus we've taken with the partnership. And then some of the partners we have, like PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, has taken a very, very strong interest in leading and helping support as an executive sponsor the work, particularly around online learning and skilling. And then also with another initiative with Microsoft and the Learning Passport to ensure the continuity of learning and skilling for several countries around the world. And we have also been working with Dubai Cares to particularly look at how do we scale up digital connectivity for schools, and an important partnership with the ILO to look at how do we kind of scale technological solutions around youth employment and ensure the quality of jobs for young people in the gig economy, and many other partners with Telenor, Africa Development Bank, IYF I know is on the call, and so forth. So the list goes on, and these commitments have been really important in advancing the work. And just the final point to make is that while there's a lot of focus on digital and online, I heard some of the comments, we have to remember that not necessarily all of the world is digitally connected. So what are the other innovations around radio, around TV, and what do you do when you don't have continued electricity? Is there a possibility for solar? So those are the kinds of things that, while it's important to look at the tech solutions, it's also important to look at the low tech solutions or countries where we don't necessarily have access to that, and not to forget that. And so that kind of thing we'd be happy to share. I know a few minutes on the call, but we can share that information around the youth networks and what they're doing. And we're very, we're very excited about what the Scouts have been doing through the crisis, the Africa Youth Union, and we can share that information, and lots of innovations around COVID and the youth response and young people being change makers themselves, because they are keen to help, and they also are an important base for finding these solutions. So that's just a couple of kind of broad updates around the GenU and a little bit about the networks, and then happy to share more information. Sarah.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate your comments. As we said, there's a lot happening in our space, and there have been, through this conversation, issues surfaced, but also some of you have shared how your different organizations are responding or partnering to try and start to address them. I'll share more at the end of the discussion. We have just a few minutes left about how we're going to be consolidating this information that all of you are sharing with us and pushing that out through our network together and sort of easier for all of us to identify what's happening in this space, how we're responding to some of the issues that you've raised around digital inclusion and inequality and vulnerability. I did want to give our friend Catherine Santore at Chemonics a chance just to quickly comment on the supply side education piece and this issue of kind of digital skilling and evolving education. I know you're working on these issues, Catherine.
Uma, thank you so much. I'm going to pick up right where you left off, because what I want to do today is really give you a concrete example of what Chemonics is doing, and specifically this is going to be in the ed space. Although I'm happy to chat offline, there's lots of stuff that we're seeing across agriculture, health, WASH, etc. But really concretizing and picking up again on that Rwanda side specifically that Uma mentioned. I'm happy to chat afterwards. Love to hear what you're going to hear in your meeting. But we are really strongly focused on access. I think the messaging, I'm going to echo a lot of what other people said in terms of the importance of focusing not only on those who have easy access, but those the harder to reach in the more rural areas, which is what our Rwanda Soma Umenye project, USAID funded, is doing now. And so again, concretely, I just wanted to share this project is very large. We've got over 100 staff, regional offices, vast network of schools that we're working with and teachers that we're working with. And I think that what we've been thinking at Chemonics and specifically on this project is, reaching those, that next level, right? Looking at urban, peri-urban, rural, but also how do we immediately shift this massive staff and not to delay other initiatives that we may have, but respond to get to that next generation of learners, because that's what we're talking about, right? As a youth community, as a youth development community, we're talking about what's going to come next for all of these individuals. So what we've been doing is we've been making a major pivot to distance learning. Those staff that I mentioned have been completely reorganized to mini cohorts, if you will, where we've got workers out in rural, our educators and our staff on Rwanda in kind of mini segments, so to speak, right? Mini groups where they're learning from each other and talking to each other, and lots of different initiatives. But one is actually digitizing the storybooks that we're creating. So this has been massive. We're working with a small business on the ground there in Rwanda to actually make this switch from sort of tangible books to the digital space. And again, that's focusing on the access, right? Because not everybody's going to have the bandwidth to be able to see these audiobooks. We're recording all of this and moving to a remote learning plan. And the big thing is we need to continue to support not only our learners, but our teachers. Massive unemployment is coming, massive changes within the Ministry of Education. And so we're pushing out these lessons, but those groups that I talked about, they're also bringing together teachers to do teacher training, updating, continually learning, I should just say. So, we've had a big problem with book supply chain. So again, that shift to digital has been really critical, and some other mediums that we're using. We've had a lot of success in moving to WhatsApp. Again, this is low bandwidth. Almost everybody has access to a phone in WhatsApp is more easily accessible than some of our other platforms that we're finding. So we've had tons of success actually moving and pushing out lessons again to teachers, to students, but also to parents. via WhatsApp and doing this audio instruction. We've dabbled with radio and online streaming, as I mentioned too. And again, I want to be cautious of time, so I'll stop there. But just to say that we think this is a real opportunity. We have seen what we're doing in Rwanda, and a big part of what my team's initiative is, and Kiwanis writ large, is making sure that our projects in Rwanda learn from our projects in the LAC region, in the MENA region, etc. So we're hosting regular meetings with all of our education projects, because that's the biggest thing, right? We're all facing these challenges. All these organizations are talking about different challenges, but within our own institutions, organizations like Kiwanis that have projects all over, we really need to make sure that they all have support. So that's another small thing that I just wanted to highlight beyond all, those macro issues that we've been talking about. But I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I know we're putting each of you on the spot to try and address a huge question in a very short amount of time, so I appreciate your comments. But again, it's helping us kind of bring to the surface a lot of key issues and themes that we will continue to explore between now and September. So this is really laying the groundwork for digging more deeply into the range of topics we've raised. I want to kind of wrap up our group discussion revisiting this theme of youth leadership, vulnerability, and inclusion, because I think it is really the sort of underlying issue across all of the responses we take going forward, whether that's evolving industries, education, the supply side, working with employers, that the issue of inclusion and tapping youth leadership is really critical. So I want to just offer last group comments to Jamie McAuliffe. He's a senior fellow at the Aspen Institute and lead for the Global Opportunity Youth Initiative, which is this global network of really, truly amazing young people. They came to our summit last year. Jamie, thank you for hanging in there with us and joining us today. Do you want to share a couple of updates from the GYEO Network and kind of how you're thinking about these issues? And then I will close out this meeting with a couple of more updates about what we're going to do as a network going forward.
Sure, thanks, Sarah. And I'll try to be really brief. For those of you who don't know the network, we're in 6 communities. We're a very place-based initiative that brings together local stakeholders and opportunity youth, out of school, out of work young people, into coalitions to advance opportunity for young people. And we're in India, Colombia, South Africa, Kenya, and Brazil at this point. And I'll just provide 2 examples that really build, I think, mostly on Rob's point about providing a platform for young people to have a voice and engage with other leaders in their community, and also support them as they're trying to mobilize to support their own communities. And there are 2 quick examples I'll give that I think are motivating us to think about how to support medium and longer term pathways for these young people. One is in Pune, where to respond to the issue of isolation and mental health and concerns about disinformation regarding COVID, the group of young people in Pune self-organized to create a hotline that they're managing. So young people have a place to call to get information about where to get services, information about the disease, food delivery, and that sort of thing. And that's now across the city of Pune and across some of the slum communities are providing that service. In Mombasa, young people are mobilizing as volunteers to provide health, hand washing and basic sanitation services in some of the slum communities and at the ferry crossing in Mombasa, which is a big point of transit. And we're basically supporting them in that volunteer effort, like many of you, thinking about how that, what we're calling sort of health volunteer core, which is very informal at this point, could be more formalized with additional training, skill building, and ultimately provide longer term pathways into the health field as we recover from COVID. So trying to think about how to provide opportunities for young people to engage safely as volunteers in their community, to deliver food, to deliver services around the health crisis, but also beginning to build health pathways and skills that will translate into longer term opportunities. So those are just 2 examples of trying to connect the short-term crisis with longer term opportunities in these communities. And really mostly wanted to emphasize what many speakers have said, which is I think one of the critical things we can all do is bring that voice of young people to other leaders, to policymakers, to make sure they're not overlooking this critical population, and also provide a platform and a place for young people to engage and feel like they're being listened to, that they're being supported, especially as so many of them are so isolated in their communities. So I'll just stop there.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I know that networks like yours and others are going to be really critical in being able to respond around the world and meet the needs of different types of youth communities. And I think the issue of inclusion and reaching opportunities, those most at risk and thus those most impacted by the crisis, is going to be really essential. So I really appreciate you being here and sitting through till the end to share your updates with us. It's great to hear from you. We are pretty much out of time for today, and I know we have covered a huge amount of content, and I've raised a lot of questions to the surface that need to be explored in more depth. And that is by design. This is meant to be a jumping off point for ongoing conversations in the months ahead. And we will continue to explore themes around evolving markets, education and the supply side. We'll be looking at the demand side with employers and government. We'll be looking at vulnerability and inclusion, and of course, youth leadership, which will cut across all of that. We will be following up this event with an announcement about how our network and the summit is pivoting to support youth engagement, to support virtual engagement activities online. And we will take a deeper dive into many of the topics we've covered today. So thank you so much so many of you have stayed for an hour and a half. I think that is really a testament to how important these issues are for all of us. And we really appreciate you being here, connecting, sharing, asking your questions. I think this is just a jumping off point for our community. So thank you again, and look for some more updates from us online. Stay safe and healthy, everyone.